What's going on, everyone? In this video, I'll be going over 17 setups I see potential in for this upcoming week. First, we'll go over SPY and QQQ just to touch on the markets. I'll show my technical analysis and then give my thoughts on those two. So first, we'll go over SPY on the daily time frame, and as you can see, this uptrending support line is still remaining true. We have had a couple bounces off this 50 SMA. We did reject this 418 area on Friday and closed just below this 20 SMA. I'd like to see if this upcoming week, if we come back down to potentially test these supports around 410 and this uptrending support line, or if we can actually break out to the upside of this 418 area and this 422.43 area. So we do have an all-time high of 422.81. I'd like to see if we could potentially push those levels and push to around 425 to 430. After that, obviously, if we do get a strong break of 422.5, we would have, a strong breakout of a ascending triangle. But overall, that's just really what I'm looking for. We have been kind of trading between 404 all the way up to 422 since the beginning of April. So really, I'd like to see if we can actually start to fill some of these gaps on the downside or start to push for new all-time highs. With that being said, we'll go over QQQ, which has been a lot weaker. However, we did see a bounce off this uptrending support line on Wednesday. We did reject the 20 and 50 SMA, so I'd really like to see if we could potentially regain some of these moving averages and actually take out 330 and potentially push 334 to 338 and possibly touch some of these all-time highs or test these levels up here. But if we do continue to reject, then I'd like to see if we do use support around this uptrending support line, or if we break that and potentially come down to test this 316 area where we do have a few bounces off these areas. So I would be watching these levels. I'd be watching for a good sense of direction. If we do break this uptrending support line, like I said, then I'd be watching 316. If that gives way, then we do have VWAP around 314 or so, and then we do have a nice support around 310 and then a level of 302 over here. So the first one that we'll go over, we'll go over some earnings reports, and then we'll go over some really strong setups. The first earnings report that we're going to go over is going to be Dick's. They report earnings Wednesday in pre-market. So with this setup, we do have this uptrending support line. We did break down a little bit on Friday. However, we could use this 50 SMA and this level around 83.60 or so for potential support. I'd like to see if we can actually bounce off these levels, potentially regain this 20 SMA and break out of 86.43 to potentially push around 89.55 to 92 or so. So we do have an all-time high of 91.80. I believe that is an all-time high. We'll go back to the monthly just to make sure. That is an all-time high. So I'd like to see overall if we could potentially break some of these levels and push to the upside for new all-time highs. But if we do continue to break down, then I'd watch for a strong break of 81 and then see if we could potentially fill this volume gap between 82 all the way down to this 78.62 level where we do have a nice support level and we do have this volume shelf. So I'd be watching to see if that level holds up. If not, then I'd be watching to see if we could come back down to around the 76 area. But with that being said, we'll go into the next setup, which will be Nvidia. Nvidia has seen a very strong move lately. Did report, I believe it was Friday, that they might do a share split. I believe it will be 4-1. That is awaiting approval. So this is reporting earnings Wednesday and after hours. We did have a nice strong breakout and continuation play of this downtrending channel. So we did reject around this 610 area. I'd like to see if we could potentially either fill some of these gaps to the downside or if we will continue to push. This earnings could be a catalyst for either downtrending price action, or we could potentially continue upwards to potentially test this all-time high level. If we do use this 588 level as support and fill this gap, then I'd like to see if we could bounce and see a reversal up to the upside and potentially take out 610.42 and potentially push to 627. And then we do have this all-time high level at 648.57. So I'd be watching those levels, but if we do actually reject and continue downwards and get some acceleration to the downside, then I'd be watching this 588 area, see if that breaks, and then see if we come down to around 573. If we do continue downwards, then I have a strong level around 550 or so, where some volume shelves really start to come into play there. We did have a nice bounce right here and right here off of these volume shelves. So if we do come down to fill these gaps, then I'd be watching around the 540 area to 548. The heaviest weighted volume shelf is around 536, just to mention that. But overall, we have seen a very strong move to the upside lately. The next one that we'll go over is going to be snow. Snow is looking interesting. It does report Wednesday and after hours. If we do get a break of this 243 area, then we could see a nice pop to around 260 or so. We've had several rejections around this area, and we do have a volume shelf that ends there, and then after that, a lot of volume starts to dry up. So if we do start to break these levels, then I'd be watching 260. If we do break 260, then I do have VWAP around 274 or so. But if we do reject these levels, then I'd be watching the 20 and 50 SMA, which are currently around 225, and then this 20 SMA is around 215 or so. If we undercut 215, then I'd be watching 205 to 206 first, and then we do have an all-time low of 184.71. So if we do get an acceleration to the downside, I'd be watching these levels to the downside. But if we do break out to the upside, then I'd be watching 243 first. Watch to see if we could push 260, and then like I mentioned, we do have that VWAP around 274. So those would be the first price targets that I have in mind. The next one that we'll go over is apps. This was a very strong growth stock that after the growth pullback has not really been performing too well. It does report earnings Wednesday and after hours, so that could give us a good insight in terms of what the short to midterm future for this stock looks like. I'd like to see if we do break out to the upside and potentially break this 66 level. We did recently reject the 20 SMA in that level. If we do break 66, we do have a decent volume gap between 66 all the way up to around 71 or so. And then our next resistance is around 70.40. So to be watching that level also, we could potentially see that we get rejections around there due to the fact that our 50 SMA would be, around that mark, and then we also have that volume shelf like I mentioned and this resistance right here. But if we do continue upwards, then I'd be watching 75.68 and then around 78.76 or so. But if we do break down, I'd be watching 62 to 61.81 or so, and then we do have this uptrending support that just recently came into effect on the micro. If we break that, then I'd be watching to see if we come back down to this 53 area where we bounced off of. If we break that level, then we could come back down to around 49 to 48. But we do have a big volume gap from 56 all the way down to 43, which after 43, we do have some very good supports around 43. So I'd be watching those levels to the downside. The next one that we'll go over is going to be Costco. They report Thursday and after hours. So Costco is looking very interesting. We are seeing a potential ascending triangle, or we could see a double top depending on how this plays out. So if we zoom out just a little bit, we are above our 20 and 50 SMAs. We do have, a lot of volume being held here. So if we do get a move to the downside, we could see that this volume absorbs the move, and we could hold these levels quite well. But if we do actually push to the upside, I'd be watching to see if we can take out 386.5 with strength, and then potentially push this all-time high around 393.15 or so. If we start to break out, then I'd be watching 400 and then potentially 410 or so. If we do break down, then I'd be watching to see if we can hold around this 375 level. If not, then we do have another level around 368 to 369. And then we do have the 50 SMA that is around 362 or so, and a nice level around 360 where we've had several bounces off of. So I'd be watching those levels also. But like I mentioned, we do have a lot of volume being held up here. So if we do see a move to the downside, a lot of this volume could absorb the move, and we could potentially see consolidation around here. The next one that we'll go over is going to be Salesforce. They report Thursday and after hours. So Salesforce is looking very interesting on the daily time frame. We have been in this downtrending channel since August 26th of 2020. We are around a lot of volume shelves. If we do get a nice move to the upside, then first I'd be watching VWAP around 228. If we get a strong break of that level, I'd be watching 233.63. After that, we would have this downtrending resistance coming into effect, and I'd be watching to see if we could potentially push around 243 to 244. And then we do have some levels around 251 to 252 and a level around 270. But after this level around 228 or so, a lot of volume starts to get weak, and there's not many volume shelves up here. So if we do get a nice breakout of this downtrending resistance, then we could see a nice pop to around 244 to 252 or so. But if we do reject these levels, I'd watch to see if we could give up these 20 and 50 SMAs and potentially come down to this 212 to 213 area. If we undercut that, then I'd be watching around 204 to 205. The next one that we'll go over is going to be Box. They report earnings Thursday and after hours. So this one's seen somewhat of an ascending triangle here, or we could see a pinch point if we want to draw in this resistance right here. So we did reject this downtrending resistance a couple times. We rejected it on Friday. I'd like to see if we could potentially break this downtrending resistance in this 24 area. If we do, then I'd be watching to see if we could push to 24.7, potentially 24.7 to 25. After that, we do have an all-time high of 26.47. This one hasn't been trading for that long. I believe this one IPO'd recently, or maybe I'm incorrect on that. Yeah, I'm definitely incorrect on that. Not sure what I was thinking there. But overall, this is a 52-week high, so if we do break these levels, then I'd like to see if we could potentially push around 24 to 25. If we do break those levels, then we do have a 52-week high of 26.47. So I'd be watching to see if we could potentially start to push some of those levels and potentially see a wick fill right here. If we do reject these levels, I'd be watching the 20 and 50 SMA to see if we come down to retest those. Those are currently around 22.5 or so. And then we do have a nice support around 22. If we break that level and then come down to test 21, then we do have this uptrending support line, which could come into effect then. But if we do break this 21 level, we do have a volume gap between 21 all the way down to 19. So we could see a nice flush if we undercut these lows, these recent lows of 2036 or 2038. The next one that we'll go over is going to be Dell. They report earnings Thursday and after hours. So Dell could potentially be seeing a descending triangle. I'd like to see if we can actually break out of this downtrend resistance. We did reject that on Friday. I'd like to see if we do hold this 98 level. If we can get some strength to break this level and potentially push 101. We do have an all-time high, I believe. So we do have an all-time high around 103.80. I'd like to see if we break these downtrend resistances in this 101 area, if we can actually get a nice move to this all-time high area around 103.80 and potentially push 105 to 110. If we do continue to reject these levels, and I'd like to see if we come back down to test 94. If we give up 94 and this 50 SMA, then we do have a volume gap between 96.70 all the way down to the support line around 89. So if we do give up 94, I'd like to see if we could potentially see a flush all the way down to 89 or so. All right, so the next plays that we're going to go over, they do not report earnings. However, they are sitting up very well on the macro. The first one that we'll go over is going to be UPST. This one's looking very interesting and has seen a very, very strong week. And we also did get a very strong bounce off of this level down here around 82 or so. We are up almost 100% or so since this bottom in May 13th, all the way up to Friday. So we have seen a 93% push in 7 days. So almost 100% push in 7 days. So this one has been very, very strong, even amidst the weakness that we've seen. Obviously, we have seen that some names have started to actually show strength again. Facebook, Even Shop is a good example. Roblox and SE are also good examples. So is Ford. But this one has been absolutely ripping. So I'd like to see if we could potentially push these all-time high levels. I'm not sure if we do have an after hours all-time high of 171. I think that is probably why that is marked up there. Yeah, we do have an after hours or pre-market all-time high of 171.04. But if we do potentially break this 157 level, I'd like to see if we could push to this 164.5 area. We do have an intraday all-time high of 165.66. If we break that, then I'd be watching to see if we could push to this 171 area. It is important to note that after such a strong run, we could potentially see a rejection of this 157 area and a consolidation or just a strong rejection and potentially come down to some of these levels. But if we do get a continuation play, then I would be watching this 157 level and this 164 level. And if we do break those levels, then 171 is the next level I'd be watching for. If we reject here, then I'd be watching to see if we can come down to around 147. And then we do have a strong level around 144.5. If we continue downwards, I'd be watching around 136. And then we do have another strong level around 123.56 or so. The next stock that we'll go over is Facebook. This one's looking nice on the macro. Alrighty, so Facebook did break out of a descending triangle. We did push for a little bit and filled this gap right here. However, after we filled the gap, we did reject the next day. I'd like to see if we can hold this 20 SMA and potentially bounce off these levels and continue upwards to around 322.3. If we break that level, then I'd be watching 326, and then we do have an all-time high of 331.81. We do have a pre-market level around 332, I believe, 332.75. So I'd be watching to see if we could push those levels. If we do get some strength this upcoming week and a continuation play to the upside. But if we do continue downwards, then I'd be watching 313, which has been a very strong level. If we continue downwards after that, then I'd be watching 308. And then we have a level around 305 or so, where our 50 SMA would potentially come into effect. The next one that we'll go over is going to be Crowd. Crowd is looking very good on the daily also. We are in a pinch point. If we zoom out a little bit, we can see that we did bounce very well off of this uptrending support line. We have regained our 20 and 50 SMAs, and we are currently testing this 210.80 level. I'd like to see if we could potentially see a continuation play. We did have a nice bottom right here. We do have a lot of volume being held at these levels though. So we could potentially see some rejections if we do see weakness. But if we do continue upwards, and I'd watch to see if we can break this 210.80 to 211 area with strength, potentially push up to 218.50 where we do have another level come into effect. And then after that, I'd be watching to see if we could break out of this downtrending resistance. And then we do have levels around 225.5 and 236.84. So we do have an all-time high of 251.28 to mention. If we do reject these levels, and I'd be watching to see if we could come down and potentially bounce off these 20 and 50 SMAs that are currently around 200. If we let go of those levels, then I'd be watching 194. And then we do have some strength around 186.5 or so. Also, we would have this uptrending support line come into effect then too. The next one that we'll go over is going to be Shop. Shopify is looking interesting on the daily also. This one is in a pinch point as well. We did just reject this downtrending resistance. I'd like to see if we do get some further continuation into next week and potentially break this 121 or 1241 level, I should say, and potentially push to around 1286. If we break these levels and break out of this pinch point, then we do have this gap up here between 1330 to 1360. So we do have a 30-point gap, and if we do break this downtrending resistance, we are above these volume shelves, so that could potentially act as a launch pad. And we don't have much volume being held up here, so we could see a nice move to the upside if we do so. Do see some strength this upcoming weekend. The next one that we'll go over is going to be Ford. Ford is actually looking interesting. I have neglected this play just due to the fact that to me it seems like kind of an old stock. It kind of seems like it's left in the past. However, this one is actually sitting up very, very well. We did just break out of a flag on the daily. We did get a nice push. I believe that there was, a release of a electric truck with Ford, a Ford F-150 electric truck. And I do believe they actually got a lot of pre-orders on that one. I think it was 50,000 within 2 days or so. And they also had a commercial with Biden that was promoting that one. But if we do continue upwards, I'd like to see if we could break this 1330 resistance level. And then we do have a 52-week high of 1362. I'm going to zoom out to the weekly just to show you these levels. So we do have, like I mentioned, that 1334 level or so, which is a weekly level, so that could be a very strong level that we do reject. If we do break that level, then I'd be watching to see if we could break the 52-week high of 1362 and potentially push to 1386. After that, I do have a level around 1425 or so. But if we do reject these levels, if we go back to the daily time frame, then I'd be watching to see if we could come back down to this 1225 level where our 50 SMA is. If we do come back down all the way down to around 1150, then we do have a lot of volume being held here. So I'd be watching these levels. But if we do continue downwards, then I have 1115 as a strong support. After that, we do have a huge volume gap between 1120 all the way down to 920. So if we do by chance get an acceleration to the downside and break these levels, then I'd be watching to see how far down we go. The next one that we'll be going over is Roblox. Roblox did print a new all-time high on Friday in terms of the intraday all-time high, but it does have an all-time high of, let's see here, 92. 92 all-time high. I believe that was a pre-market level, but we do have a new intraday all-time high that we made on Friday. As you can see, we did get nice volume, so that is definitely something that I'm noting. I'd like to see if we do get a continuation play to the upside and potentially break out for a new all-time high in terms of the intraday time frames. We do have an all-time high on the intraday time frames of 84.68. So I'd be watching to see if we can get a continuation to the upside and break 85 and potentially push that 92 level, which is a pre-market all-time high. But if we do reject these levels, I'd be watching to see if we come down to around 80.74 or all the way down to around 79.60. Then we do have a level around 77.75 or so. And we do have a slight gap between 76.91 to 77.31. So if we do see an acceleration to the downside, then I'd be watching to see if we could fill this gap. After that, I do have a level around 74.83. The last one that we'll go over is going to be SE. This one is setting up very well on the daily also. We did have a very strong bounce off this uptrending support line, continued upwards, saw great continuation to regain these 20 and 50 SMAs. I'd like to see if we do get a continuation this upcoming week. We do have some gaps that we could potentially fill. We have a small gap right here between, let's see, 250.82 to 252.72. So if we do continue upwards, I'd be watching to see if we could fill that gap. Then we have a level around 257.37. After that, I'd be watching around 266, then all the way up to 272 or so. If we reject these levels, though, and give up this 240 support in these 20 and 50 SMAs, then I'd be watching to see if we could come back down to this 228 level where we do have support, but we do also have this gap between 226.68 to 230.59. So I'd be watching to see if we could fill either one of these gaps this upcoming week. If we do get a continuation to the upside, then I'd really be watching to see if we could take out some of these levels and possibly push to some of these all-time high levels. But like I said, if we do reject, then I'd be watching to see if we could potentially come down to fill this gap where we do have some good supports. With that being said, we do have a lot of very solid potential setups this upcoming week. Obviously, as I'm sure a lot of you know, the crypto markets have been pulling back very hard. So people could potentially be pulling their money out of crypto and tossing them back into the stock market. So people could be tossing those back into beaten down tech stocks, growth stocks, and whatnot. So if we do see that that trend continues in terms of crypto going down, then we could see a lot of money pouring into the stock market and see some of these beaten down tech stocks continue to see continuation plays after strong bounces. But with that being said, obviously scout for your setups, create a game plan, and execute with discipline, and let's get after it this upcoming week.